Oh, Mr. John, thank you for being with us and taking our questions. I watched the meeting online, and IMF has doubled the economic growth for Georgia, reaching the target that the government of Georgia has also for 2021, and that's 7.7%, the highest so far that I see in respect to other IFIs. What is the reason behind this decision? And I'm asking you this because when I talked with EBRD, for example, which has the lowest outlook for growth so far, this institution told me that it would be impossible to have higher projections before the detailed analysis of the recent growth structure was available. What makes the IMF optimistic about Georgia's economic growth?
First off, thank you for speaking with me today. The COVID crisis took a heavy toll on the economy with a 6.2% contraction in 2020, and this is the largest we've seen since the 1990s. The government appropriately took measures to support vulnerable businesses and households, but it's been a difficult crisis. So then turning to the 2021 forecast, as you mentioned, we see the forecast, the growth has gained impressive momentum in the second quarter. And I think as you're alluding to, this reflects some flash GDP releases. And indeed, we do look forward to seeing more detail. But in the past, the flash GDP releases have been quite good indicators of economic growth. And so we take those into account. When we look at them, we see pretty broad-based strength. And so there's, across the economy, the main factor that goes into the flash GDP releases are VAT turnover. And that suggests that there's pretty strong activity across the economy. Some of the factors that are supporting the strong growth or the upgrade in growth, strong remittances, exports, and early signs of a rebound in tourism. And I would say, maybe to think about this a little bit, during the pandemic, a lot of people were not going out and spending, so there's likely some pent-up demand. We've also heard in talking to lots of people that there's more domestic tourism activity than there used to be. So when we look at the April and May numbers, those are quite strong, and that's what contributes to this 7.7% growth forecast. If you look at what the Ministry of Finance has submitted to the Parliament with the budget, they have an optimistic scenario, and they think it's possible growth could be even stronger. We're comfortable where we are with 7.7% based on what we've seen. But as more data come out, we will take that into account, and if needed, we revise our forecast. While our forecast has been upgraded substantially, it is important to note that there are significant downside risks, and we have sort of an environment of greater than usual uncertainty. And so I think you've seen, perhaps in the statement, progress in securing vaccines, accelerating vaccinations. These are key to controlling the pandemic, and we have challenges such as the Delta variant. And Georgia right now is a country that does not have a high level of vaccination. So that is a key risk. And I want to highlight that. Just controlling the pandemic is really important for realizing strong economic outturns.
Visit of the mission and work of the mission has been, even though online, it has been in a quite stressful environment in Georgia. You are aware what's going on currently politically in Georgia, and of course I'm not going to ask you to make political comments here, but since you mentioned the COVID-19 and also the uncertainty that it has brought to Georgia and to the whole world, such examples like I don't know, even one harmed tourist because of the uncurbed violence in Tbilisi streets. Does this add also to the uncertainty that we have been speaking about, and are such factors factored in, and do you view such things also as downside risks to the 7.7% economic growth that we have been mentioning?
Thank you for your question, and maybe I could start by saying, like others, we are saddened by recent events, including the death of a television cameraman, Lexo Lashkarava. And we offer our condolences to his family. As noted in our concluding statement, if there were renewed political uncertainty, this could affect investment and confidence. So, it's sort of not surprising that political stability is important for economic stability and growth. So we include that as a potential risk. If I were to say, look back, if you think back to the last elections, after which there was sort of a long political standoff, that can affect the ability of the parliament to undertake important reforms. It doesn't help the ability to move forward in sort of key economic policy areas. So, we do highlight that as a risk. That's not in our baseline. As I said, we have a pretty strong growth forecast, but we do highlight that the number one risk, as I said, is the pandemic and the potential that gets worse, or that vaccinations don't pick up as quickly as we need. That's sort of the main area of risk. But after that, we do mention the potential for renewed political uncertainty, and that this is another thing to keep on the radar screen.
Yes, thank you. And also, to be more precise, this 7.7% of the economic growth, this figure does not envisage any major lockdown, right?
Exactly. So we do a forecast, and the time we do the forecast, that's our baseline view, what we think is most likely to happen. And then we highlight, and so that's 7.7% growth for this year, for 2021. And then we highlight, potential risks to that forecast. And I think the most important risk we see to the forecast is if the pandemic worsens, and that could be because of the variants I mentioned, or if, vaccination progress isn't as fast as hoped. These are things that could affect the forecast. There can be upside risks as well, although I think we've factored in more of those in raising our forecast. So we've seen strong activity early, I guess in the second quarter of 2021. And so we're factoring in, to an extent, things like, pent up demand, that there's stronger consumer spending and businesses rebuilding inventories, et cetera. Some of it, more of that's probably in the forecast. So then we have a few downside risks that we have highlighted in our concluding statement.
IMF's comments, IMF's advices, decisions have always been kind of like an anchor for other financial institutions as well. For example, Georgia's judicial reform came to the global agenda after the IMF had consistently included it among the structural reforms needed to ensure the appealing business environment, also among, of course, many other reasons. Today, we hear from the EU very clearly that another tranche for Georgia's support, which is about 60 million euro, is at stake because of the judicial reform not meeting the standards of the recent agreement. And this criticism is also shared by the US Department of State. What is IMF's take on that?
Sure, thank you for your question. So we'd leave it to the EU to determine whether its conditions for financial support have been met, including with respect to judiciary reforms. There are a number of conditions attached to the EU financial assistance. But maybe to step back, having a transparent, efficient, and impartial judicial system is important for the business environment, for attracting investment, and for strong private sector-led growth. And other development partners, counterparts we spoke to during the mission, and international assessments have highlighted the importance of judiciary reforms. And accordingly, we encourage the government to make progress in this area to strengthen the business environment. So I think maybe that is the key point to take away, that having an effective, impartial, transparent judiciary is very important for the business environment. And so we have encourage progress in this area.
What are the main areas where IMF sees that the government of Georgia needs counseling, needs recommendations and advice?
Coming out of the pandemic, there are a lot of challenges, and so one of them is undertaking fiscal adjustment while managing fiscal pressures and risks to comply with the fiscal rule. We view the fiscal rule as an important anchor for credibility. Another is further advancing on state-owned enterprise reform. This is an area that the government has made good progress in the past, and there's more that can be done. Strengthening public investment management is another priority, particularly as the government is spending quite a bit on capital projects. So these are things like infrastructure, highways, et cetera. And as hopefully the pandemic recedes, we see an opportunity to reinvigorate structural reform progress. And so this could be to address issues such as high unemployment and inequality. And these are longstanding challenges in Georgia, but the crisis has made them worse. And so we we think these are areas where more can be done. And then, maybe just back also on the macro environment, another priority is to make sure inflation comes down. We think the National Bank of Georgia is doing a good job there. We support its policy stance, but to bring inflation back down toward target, and also to maintain very strong financial sector regulation and supervision. Georgia did, quite a bit to help cushion the blow of the crisis because it was in a better position coming in, and that reflected a lot of policy work before the crisis. And so rebuilding those buffers and making sure that there's still strong financial regulation and supervision, those are key priorities.
Oh, is the IMF helping Georgia, government of Georgia, with the 10-year development plan, Mr. John?
So on the 10-year development plan, like I said, we've just had the Article 4 consultations, and we discussed sort of the broad range of economic policy issues that affect the country, and very good dialogue, very candid, excellent exchanges. And we expect that many of the topics we discussed with the government will be part of the development plan. Mm-hmm. These include, fiscal plans to enable spending on key development priorities such as education and infrastructure. But we are not advising on the details of the plan itself.
I hope you will at some point, because the contours that have been presented by the government so far from the first sight seem that they are adding more burden to the state budget while projecting average economic growth at 5%, 5.2%. I was listening to you during the conference today, and you had this very specific focus on the need for a fiscal consolidation and on the need to more sound macroeconomic environment. When should Georgia's government start taking these steps, and do you think it is realistic to respond to the fiscal rule by 2023?
So, as I had said earlier, the government responded appropriately during the crisis to provide households and businesses with support to minimize the human and economic impact of this, unprecedented crisis. And it's just natural, with these expenses and the decline in revenue as the economy contracted, that the deficit and public debt, rose sharply. This is what we expect. One reason this wasn't so concerning is Georgia has a fiscal rule, and they've been strongly committed to it, and that's a real anchor. And it gave a sense that this was a temporary, increase in the deficit and the debt, and we're very encouraged to see the strong commitment from the government to complying with the fiscal rule. So this is by 2023 getting the deficit below. Fiscal deficit below 3% of GDP and making sure debt is below 60% of GDP. The debt we expect will be below 60% of GDP well before 2023, but so the real challenge is to bring the deficit down. Some COVID-19 related costs, so there's understandably a lot of temporary costs to respond to the crisis. Mm-hmm. These should go away when the pandemic ends, but the government will still need to identify further revenue or saving measures, and we have some recommendations. So we recommend saving revenue windfalls if growth and revenue are stronger than expected this year. We recommend undertaking a tax expenditure review and strengthening tax administration, both of which could yield additional revenue. We recommend strengthening public investment management to boost the efficiency of capital spending. This is what I mentioned before, sort of a lot of the infrastructure investment that's going on to make sure that these are high quality investments that have a good return for growth. And also really taking into account spending pressures and risks when formulating budgets. So, we see some potential spending pressures in areas such as aging, this is health and pensions, education, and we see risks from state-owned enterprises and also potentially in the energy sector. The government's fiscal risk statements have done a good job highlighting these risks. And so to control some of these, we would suggest, taking action on SOE reform, and also specifying in advance clear criteria in the power sector for any deviations from feed-in premiums. We are confident the commitment is very strong from the government. We do think that they can meet the requirements of the fiscal rule by 2023.
If the government starts taking consistent steps in this direction of fiscal consolidation, but on the other hand, we see that the outlook on inflation has also doubled, right? Almost doubled. So, and NBG sticks to the strict monetary policy, which is right policy, as you have also mentioned. Then is 7.7% economic growth still reachable?
Yes. So our 7% forecast does reflect. For example, the recent monetary policy increases by the National Bank of Georgia. We are not at this time calling for any further rate increases. We think that the National Bank of Georgia has responded appropriately to the increase in inflation. And it stands ready to do more if needed, but that's not in our baseline. We see the inflation, the factors driving inflation is largely temporary. And so it is important to be vigilant and make sure that these temporary factors don't translate into more lasting inflation. But as I said, we think they're temporary. Our forecast has inflation coming down significantly in 2022 as some of these temporary factors fade. There are a lot of aspects to inflation that are very volatile. So like food and energy prices can be quite volatile. Mm-hmm. Often we look at core inflation, which should give a slightly more stable read on what's going on with price developments. And the last two core inflation readings have both come down a little bit. So it's a small improvement, but it's something that gives us a little bit of confidence that, as I said, that these factors are temporary and that there should be a reduction in inflation in 2022.
Okay, and my last question, should we wait for the next program between the IMF and Georgia? It would, for me, show if the government is really ready for fiscal consolidation as well.
As I said, we've just completed our Article 4 consultations, and this is a great chance to continue our close dialogue and discuss challenges and policy priorities. This is not a program negotiation, but I will say in a second, there are a lot of policy areas where we see sort of broad common views with our counterparts in the government and at the National Bank of Georgia. The Minister of Finance said very clearly that they would like another program. And so, we stand ready to discuss a new program, and that negotiation happens separately than this Article 4 mission, but we are ready to do it. We are not negotiating a program now, so I can't tell you exactly what will be in it, but we shared these views with the government, with the NBG. So I think there's a good sort of common understanding that can provide a basis for a future program.
Wonderful. Then there's the reason for our next interview as well.
We'll look forward to our next interview, hopefully in Tbilisi.
Yes, hopefully in Tbilisi.